Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be going over how to solve different puzzles. If you've played chess for any amount of time, you've probably come across many puzzles. They are very enjoyable to do, but if you haven't seen a video like this or had someone sit down and explain how to do a video, more than likely you have come across many different puzzles that you just can't solve and you really have no idea how to approach that. So today in this video I want to go over two puzzles that are really going to teach you some basic ideas on how you should approach a puzzle and different things that you should be looking for. Now, both of these puzzles are posted, the links in the description below on YouTube, so if you want to go to the website, thechesswebsite.com, and practice these puzzles before you actually watch the video, feel free to do that. The first example that we're going to be talking about is posted on the chess page on Facebook. If you're not already a fan of the chess page on Facebook, I'll have a link below in the YouTube description. Definitely make sure that you're a fan of this. There's a ton of fantastic information posted on that Facebook page. So we'll go ahead and get into it. The first example, if we look at it right here, it is white's move, and it is white to mate in 3. Now the first thing we want to do as far as any chess puzzle is look at it and see if our opponent's king can move, especially again if this is a mate in a certain number of moves. In this case, our opponent's king cannot move. Now, why can this king not move? He can't come to h7 because our knight here on g5 is blocking, and it can't come to h5 because our king here is on h4. Because of that, this is very important to know, more than likely the knight here on g5 and the king here on h4 are not going to move. Again, they are keeping the king at bay. If the king cannot move, more than likely you're going to be using your other pieces to try to check your opponent. Now, this may seem elementary as well, but if the king cannot move for your opponent and you put him in check, that is going to be checkmate. So with that said, we need to figure out a way to use one of our other pieces to check the opponent's king. So the first thing I want to look at is this knight here on f3. Now the first thing we want to do as far as this knight on f3 is we need to figure out where that knight could go to check our opponent's king. Now we're not thinking about if that piece is threatened or that square is threatened or who can stop it. We're going to worry about that later. First we need to figure out where this knight could end up that could check this opponent's king. Again, this king cannot move, so as long as we check that king, it's going to be checkmate. So if we look at it, I'm going to go ahead and highlight the squares here. If we can get our knight here to g4, again that's checkmate. If we can get our knight here to f7, checkmate. And again, knight here to g8, that's checkmate. Now I know again, I'm not even looking at the squares that can be attacked by black here. I'm just looking at the squares that we can move our knight to that could checkmate the king here on h6. Now if we do look at it, we can see this pawn, or this square on f7 and this square on g4 can be reached in 2 moves. So we can move our knight to e5, and then we can move it to f7 or g4. It's going to be actually very, very difficult to get our knight to g8. As you can see, it's going to take many more moves to come to g8. Since we only have 3 moves in this entire puzzle, more than likely I'm going to go ahead and rule out this g8 square. So right away we know if the knight is going to end up making the checkmate, it's going to be on g4 or f7. Now right away we don't know if the knight's going to be the one giving that final blow. It could be the queen. We now need to go over the possibilities for the queen. Now if we look at the queen here, we can see really the only move that we could possibly get to in any amount of time is going to be this h8 square. So we know that we do have a possibility. Obviously we could get there if we moved to e8 and then over to h8, or if we moved up to b8, then we could come over to h8. Either of these is going to deliver a checkmate. Again, we're not looking at the black pieces right now. We're going to worry about that later. But right now, we pretty much know that the queen is either going to be on h8 and deliver the fatal blow, or we're going to end up having our knight here on g4, or it's going to be here on f7. So now that we know all of our threats, we can now start to work on the puzzle. Now, as we talked about before, we'd really like to bring our knight to e5. Again, that's kind of the hub where it can come to f7 checkmate, or g4 checkmate, depending on where our opponent goes. So first, we know we really need to move this queen first. Again, we don't want to move our knight anywhere farther away from this e5 square, and we also do not want to move either our knight here on g5 or our king here on h4, at least right away. Again, the king cannot move here. Later on down the road, if something changes, we may have to move them, but for now we do not want to move this knight on g5 or our king here on h4 unless we have to, unless there's going to be a forced mate. So if we kind of look at our different options for our queen here, as we talked about before, really our best threat that we have for our queen is if he can come to h8. Again, we do have this rook here on a8, but if we move our queen anywhere else, he's really not going to help us. Obviously, our opponent is going to try everything he can to do to stop our knight coming to e5, and if we only have one threat, if our knight is coming to e5 and he can stop that, well, it's going to be really hard to find checkmate in 3. So we really only have two options. Again, we need to have the possibility that our queen comes to h8. So we have queen to e8, and we also have queen to b8. Again, our next move is more than likely going to be followed up with knight to e5, all things considering, depending on what black does, however, choose to do. So from here, black has two different options. Obviously, he can take here on b8, and then white can now come to e5, and there's no stopping white now. There's nothing that black can do that can stop both this knight to f7 or this knight to g4. Now, black does not obviously have to take here. If he doesn't take it, if he says, you know what, this knight is going to come here to e5, I really have to stop that, then he could bring his rook down to a5. Again, he is now stopping this knight here coming to e5, but again, as we talked about before, we have to know all of our threats that we have. We also have this threat of queen to h8, and this is also checkmate. So again, black really doesn't have a lot of good options. These are pretty much the forced options. He can either take on b8, and we're going to checkmate with our knight here, or he can come down to a5, and then we're pretty much going to win with our queen. Now, I do want to cover one last option for those who really like to get in depth in the puzzles, and they always try to comment and say, hey, what about this really weird variation that I found that no one would actually do, but it doesn't work on that. So again, as we talked about, more than likely you will see the black AI for the computer when you solve this puzzle move, but if a human were to actually bring his bishop down to f5, again, we couldn't now bring our knight to e5 because the bishop could come to e6. He's now defending both this square here on f7, and he's also defending the square on g4. Again, both of the squares that we're really trying to hit on. We still can't bring our queen to h8 because, again, the rook here is on a8. So instead of coming to e5 first, we are first going to come to f7 with our knight, and then the only move that he has is to come to h7, and now we can finish up with our knight here on g5. Again, he cannot move back here because of our knight, and again, he can't move up because of our queen here on b8. So as we talked about before, we didn't want to have to move this knight if we have to, but as you can see, we still ended up with a knight here on g5. So unless something crazy happens again, you really want to focus on the pieces that you have, keeping your king, your opponent's king at bay, and then you want to move your other pieces and see how you can arrange those to checkmate your opponent king, typically by just putting them in check. So again, in this case, first move is to put them queen to b8, and then you have a lot of different variations if you want to checkmate with your knight, or you can always have the option of bringing your queen over to h8. So this is puzzle number 1. Puzzle number 2 we'll go ahead and take a look at. The next puzzle is easy puzzle number 7 on the website. Again, the link will be below in the YouTube description. I definitely encourage you to take some time now that we've gone through one puzzle to see if you can solve this on your own if you have not already. but I'm going to go ahead and dive into it. Again, as you can see, this is another example. If our opponent's king cannot move, again, he cannot come to the 7th rank because of our rook. He cannot come to c6 because of our pawns here on b5 and d5. He can't come to c5 or e5 because of our king here. And he can't come to e6 because of our pawn here on d5. So again, we first have to see what pieces and pawns we have that are keeping this king at bay. And as you can see, these are the pieces and pawns right now that are keeping this king from moving here. Now our opponent does have a light square bishop. There's no way for him to attack our king. So our king is pretty much safe. We don't have to worry about any random checks from our opponent. There's really no threats that we can see from our opponent. So really we have two different pieces. We have this bishop here on e1 and we have this knight here on h6, and we know that we need to deliver some sort of check from one of these pieces for checkmate. First piece I want to look at is the bishop here on e1 and take a look at all the possibilities to deliver a check on our opponent. Again, we first do not want to really focus too much on if our piece can be captured. We just want to think about the different possibilities that we have. Later on, again, pieces and pawns are going to be moved, possibly, so we want to think about all of the different variations that we do have. Now, as you can keep in mind, some of these, square on e7 or square on f8, probably not going to work as much. It's going to be really hard to get our bishop up here in 2 moves to deliver a blow. But as you can see, a move like bishop to b4, that would be checkmate if this bishop, if this pawn here on a4 is not checkmate, or if it's not there. Again, a3, it's much likely that we'd come to b4 first. It would be a lot harder to bring our bishop down to a3, but again on the other side as well, we do have all these different options. So first piece we're going to look at is the bishop, and then secondly we're going to be looking at the knight here on h6. So just keep all these variations in your head. Again, we'd like to come down to g3 if we could. We could come to f4 as a checkmate. Again, all dependent on where black's pieces are. Now we can look at our other piece, our knight here on h6, and it's actually going to be a little easier. And this time I'm actually going to only be looking at the moves that we're really, possibly going to be dealing with. Again, he could come over, at a different place and deliver checkmate, if he was on, knight e4, but again, he's not going to get there. So I'm going to go over the possibilities that we may use. And that's going to be f7, and it's also going to be f5. If we came to f5 checkmate, if we came to f7 checkmate, again, it really depends on where this bishop on g6 is. If we move right away, that's going to be pretty terrible, because it doesn't matter if we come to f5, he takes, or if we come to f7, he's going to take right away. So as we can see, the 2 squares that we want to go with our knight, we really don't want to do that right away, because we're going to lose our checkmate in 2 because of the bishop here on g6. So at these 2 pieces, we know our knight's really not the best move. So we need to find the best square for our bishop, because our bishop is going to be our first move. And this is a very important point, especially in this puzzle. We have to think about where our opponent can move. Now our opponent has 3 different moves that he can make. He can move his pawn to a4. That is a potential move. He could bring his pawn to g4. That is also a potential move. Or he can move his bishop. Now, as we talked about before, this bishop here on g6 is very important. It is defending both squares of this f7 square and this f5 square. If this bishop moves anywhere, he is going to lose one of these squares. Again, our knight's just hanging out here on h6. It's not threatened. It cannot be taken right away. So if this bishop moves, it doesn't matter if he comes to h5, to h7, to e8. It doesn't really matter. One of these squares is going to be open. So we know that the bishop cannot move from g6, or it's going to be a very, very easy checkmate from us. Again, we know that we have to move our bishop. We have to move it somewhere. At the same token, we know that either the pawn is going to come to a4, or this pawn is going to come to g4. So if we look at it, we know, okay, we're either going to have room to bring our bishop to b4, or we're going to have an option to bring our bishop to f4. Both of these are going to deliver checkmate. So we need to have a square where it doesn't matter if he comes to a4 or if he comes to g4, we can target both of these squares, this b4 square or this f4 square. And that move is bishop to d2. If you look at it again, it's a fantastic puzzle because again, if this bishop moves, doesn't matter where the bishop moves, it's going to be checkmate. If he does not move his bishop, he can either bring it to a4, and that's going to be checkmate, or he can also bring his pawn to g4, and then we bring our bishop to f4, and that's going to be checkmate. So hopefully you guys were able to solve this on your own. If you weren't, hopefully this allowed you to understand how to solve puzzles maybe on your own instead of going puzzle by puzzle and trying to figure out each one individually. Maybe this will kind of give you some in-depth knowledge on how you should approach a puzzle, what things you should be looking for, and it should make your life a whole lot simpler. Now going forward, we will be going over how to solve different puzzles. In the case that the king can move, typically those are going to be forced variations where you have to check your opponent over and over until you have a forced variation. We'll be going over those, but definitely want to take some time. So many people are curious how to solve different puzzles, and they typically just want an answer right away, but I thought it'd be better to teach people how they should actually be approaching these puzzles to kind of help them later on down the road. Obviously, puzzles are a great segment in your own chess game. The more you can kind of break down a chess game and see what pieces are used for what, it'll really help your chess eye when you get into a game and you may have this forced checkmate that you may have missed before, but now knowing kind of how your pieces work together, it will be easier. So if you guys haven't already checked out some more of the puzzles at thechesswebsite.com, feel free to leave me feedback or send me any responses about these puzzles or other puzzles you have questions about, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.